By default, when you record cues, you'll be recording them in tracking mode. We can see that at the top of our sidebar here in yellow text. And what we mean by tracking is basically your lights will change when they're told to. Your lights will change when they're given an instruction, which sounds pretty straightforward, but let's take a look at it in action. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to go and open my cue list drop down here in the cue list sidebar, and I'm going to go and create a new list. And for this, I'm just going to call it tracking for our example. So we've got empty cue list now that we can work with. And I'm just going to keep things really simple, and I'm just going to have one light turning on, one after the other. So I'm going to go to my visualization window there, bottom right, and I'm going to go and say 1 at to turn my first fixture on. And there we go. That is going to be Q1. Simple as that. So I'm just going to go and do a record. And there we go. There's Q1. So now I'm going to go and say 1 at 0, enter, 2 at. And I'm going to do another record. So we've now recorded 2 really simple cues. And I'm just going to do one more. 2 at 0, enter, 3 at. Record. So let's reset that, and we're going to go into Q1. So we have recorded in tracking, but it's kind of meaningless at the moment. We don't see that evident because we're just running through our cues, and yep, they look exactly how we recorded them. Each light coming on one after the other. We can see that we've got currently on stage, we've got light number 3 has a blue FL, that means full, and 2 has a green 0. So blue is values that are faded up. You can remember that because it's up towards the sky, and green are values that have faded down. That's values that have gone down towards the grass. But tracking really kicks in when you need to make a change. So maybe you have forgotten to add a light in, and you're going to need to insert a cue. So maybe you need to record a new cue out of order, or maybe you need to actually change one of the existing cues. You need to update a cue. Tracking is really important in either of those scenarios. Now, my example here, I'm going to go into Q1, and I realise, before we go into Q2, I actually need light number 4 on. So I'm going to go and say that I want 1 at 0, enter, and I actually want 4 on. And this is what I need to go between 1 and 2. So I'm going to use the syntax record 1.5, enter. And we've now recorded this lighting state in as Q1.5, and we can see it is active on stage. Let's go into Q1. There it is. There's our light 1 on at full, just as we programmed it. 1.5, yep, happy days. That means that 4 is on its own. We've inserted that cue. But we go into Q2 and light 4 is still on. We can see though that it has been given a purple value. And if you ever see that a fixture has a purple value, that means it is tracked. It's tracked from a previous cue. And you might be thinking, well, we didn't tell that light to come on when we programmed Q2. And yeah, exactly, we didn't tell that light to come on, but we also didn't tell it to go off either. We in fact didn't give light 4 any information. When we recorded Q2, the only thing we told our console to do was tell light number 1 to go off and light number 2 to come on. Every single other light was not given an instruction. Therefore, we've turned light 4 on in Q1.5. Let's go back into it. Yep, there we go. It comes on in 1.5. But Q2 does not have an instruction for it. So it just stays doing what it was doing originally. That's tracking. Now, in my scenario here, you've kind of got 2 approaches. You can think, oh, well, I've now got a light on in my queue that I didn't want it to. Light 4 should be off in this queue. Therefore, we're going to need to update this queue. We're going to need to correct that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and say 4 at 0, enter. And I'm then going to just do a update. And that has taken it out of Q2. But, of course, because it is a tracking update, we're in tracking mode, it means the light is also now out of Q3. You can see that there is no value given to light 4 because it hasn't been given a new instruction in Q3, but because Q2 is taking that light out, it remains out in Q3. So where it comes in really useful is when you want to update a load of queues at once. Maybe I go back into Q1 and I realise, oh, the whole scene would be better with light 6 at 50. So I'm going to go and say 6 at 50, enter. There it is. And I'm going to go and do an update. And that has updated Q1. And because we've done it as a tracking update, that fixture is now in all of my subsequent queues. I've been able to update a load of queues all at once just by doing a tracking update. But going back to the example of 1.5, you will of course get the situations where you do only want to add a light into one queue. You want to make an amendment, but you only want it to apply to the queue you are working on. So in 1.5, let's maybe say that I actually want 5 at full, but I only want it in this queue. I only want it in 1.5. I want it to be back off in Q2. Well, in that situation, what I can do is say update and then tap my tracking options button. Doing that has automatically populated the queue number for me. It knows we're currently in 1.5. That's the queue with the yellow box. So it's automatically populated the queue number in, and it has brought queue only onto my command line. And if I go and say enter right now, it has done a queue only update. It's added the light into Q1.5, but if I go into Q2, you'll notice it's been given a green 0. So this is the counterintuitive bit. When you do a queue only update, the console's actually updating 2 queues because it's adding the light in, it's making your changes to the queue you're working on, but it's actually undoing your changes for you in the next queue to make sure that the next queue looks exactly how you had it. And we can see exactly that. We've got Q2 is now telling light to 5 to go off. It's actually given that light an instruction in Q2, although we didn't actually make a change to Q2 itself. Now, there are actually a few other tracking options to be aware of. What we've also got the ability to change is whether the intensity and the fixture attributes behave in the same way. Because if you go and tap the tracking options button twice, or 3 times, sorry, you will get queue only intensity tracking for attributes. That means your intensity, yep, they are only going to be affected in the current queue. So the next queue that you go into, the console will automatically revert your fixture intensities back to how they were behaving previously. But it won't do that for the attributes. The attributes will just continue doing what they were doing. And that is quite often a more powerful tool to use, especially when using moving lights, because it means, yep, the intensities, you can just update a queue with queue only intensities, and yep, that means that you go into the next queue and it still looks how you programmed it. But it does allow the attributes behind the scenes with the fixtures intensity at 0, it allows them to track through, and that might be a more useful technique to use. If I go into Q3, and I go, oh, actually, throughout this whole scene, I would have rathered have light 6 at 75. So I'm going to go and say 6 at 75. And what I'm then going to do is I'm going to go and say that I want to update, and I'm going to go and hit tracking options once, tracking options again, and a second press gives me track back. So I can now say, right, I want to update the queue, but I want it to track back. So it's going to track back any changes you've made. That's your red values here. So if I go and say enter, 6 is now at 75%, but in purple. That suggests to us, well, the fixture has not been given an instruction in this queue. So we've actually done a very powerful thing here. We have updated Q3, but not actually made any changes to Q3. Because the change, if we reset our queue stack, has actually happened in Q1, because when you do a track back, it will update the queue where the edited fixtures were last given an instruction. But it did that automatically. You can imagine, I've got several queues here, all in one scene. I can, at the very end of the scene, decide, it would have been all slightly better if that light was at 50, done that in the very last queue, done a track backwards update, and the console has automatically worked out where that light was previously given an instruction, and it will actually make the change to that queue for us, even though at the time we were working on Q3. So that's important to be aware of. So the tracking options, they are indeed applicable to when you record a queue. So you can say record and then hit your tracking options, or they're important when you tap update and then tap your tracking options. A useful tool to be aware of, I'm going to go and minimize my parameter table here. And I'm actually going to go and say more and then open the track sheet. And my track sheet gives me in table form my queues running from left to right and my fixtures running from top to bottom. And this is really helpful to just indicate here what's going on. We can see that in Q1, light 6 is told to go on at 75%, and that light is not actually then given an instruction for any of the other queues. We can see it's just left at 75 in purple, it's not been given a new level. Whereas we can see, for example, lights 4 and 5 in Q2, they are told to go down. So we see that they are given a green value because they have a hard-coded information, which means they are sent to 0%. So tracking is as simple as that. It is all about your fixtures doing what they are doing and only doing that when they're told to. So if you do make a change out of order, just bear in mind how you originally recorded the subsequent cues, because if they didn't have an instruction for that light, well, the light's going to just continue doing what it was doing, unless, of course, we use one of those tracking options, such as queue only, or queue only for the intensities, but leaving the attributes to track through.